I'll leave it with you.
Okay, thanks, Alex. So yeah, I'm Blair. Thanks for having me. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Washington in Seattle. And I'm going to talk a bit about some 3D printed patterns that kind of aren't designed up front, but that are discovered through some material exploration. And so my plan for the next 10, 15 minutes is to kind of talk about some limitations of conventional 3D printing software, and then introduce some of the alternative tools that I've been using that are, I think, more inspired by the sensibilities of algorithmic pattern. And kind of think about the relationship between material exploration, notation, and documentation in 3D printing. So to kick things off, I wanted to start with this kind of seemingly simple task of just like trying to 3D print a line. And if you haven't 3D printed before, or if you have, if you wanted to do this, you might start by seeing if someone else has already made a line that you can go and 3D print. So in this video, I'm on Thingiverse, which is a website. It's the largest online repository of designs for fabrication. And when I search for a single line, there's a bunch of stuff that comes up. But after I poke around for a bit, I find this model uploaded by an author named DJ Tron from like 3 years ago. And what we get here is an STL file. So it's like a digital model that represents the geometry of a line. But we still have to actually convert this into some instructions that we can run on a 3D printer. And we do that in what's called a slicer. And it's called this because it slices a 3D model up into a bunch of 2D contours. And then that's what it uses to generate the actual machine instructions. And so I kind of brought the line model into the slicer here. But when I try to actually slice it to generate the instructions for the printer, I end up with this error that the print is empty and the model is not printable with the current print settings. And so this kind of thing is pretty common. And to debug it, you have to start rummaging through all the different settings that a slicer makes available. And my point with this, and here in this video, I'm just sort of clicking through just to give you a sense of the different things you can change. But my point here is really that just doing a simple thing like printing a line can be just really hard in this software. And there's no feedback from the machine back into this software. And so all of these settings that you're seeing have to be really carefully configured up front in order for the whole process to work. And that is also kind of very different than other material practices, because we have to already have an idea of what material we're going to be using, the machine we're going to be running this on. And there's kind of no ability to change these things on the fly or at runtime when you're actually sitting in front of the machine. And so, printing a line is maybe a bit of a tongue-in-cheek example, but I actually think that the stakes of not being able to kind of easily and expressively make a line are actually important for different creative practices. So in this image here, it shows a bunch of examples from professionals who use digital fabrication machines to manufacture kind of products in low volume. And so across all these images, there's 3D printing and clay 3D printing, milling of wood, textiles work, and more. And my kind of main takeaway here is that these aren't kind of pure geometric artifacts, but they're also kind of designed in machine toolpaths. And so by that, I mean, for example, for this like tall vase that's on the far left here, the design of the object is kind of driven by the mark that's been left in the wood here and the pattern that you see there. And that's information that's not necessarily like purely encoded in a geometry model, but you have to try a bunch of different settings and see what works in order to get that. So to think about other ways of printing lines, To think about other ways of printing lines, I made a library called p5.fab. So it's a JavaScript library to control machines from within the creative coding environment p5.js. And in this video, we're just watching the printer kind of over extrude these one-shot blobs and then bridge between them to make this delicate vase structure. And this is an example of what I mean by kind of designing in machine toolpaths, or the path the machine is taking, because I'm kind of specifying how much material to kind of ooze out on these blobs, and I'm moving kind of up in the Z direction as I do that, kind of out of the XY plane. And then I'm tuning the speed to bridge between those blobs so that you move fast enough that the material doesn't sag, but not so fast that it kind of breaks or snaps. And it's not shown here, but I have my laptop off screen and it's just plugged into my 3D printer over a wired USB connection. And I'm just kind of streaming commands to it. And those commands I'm generating in JavaScript code. So just as like a very kind of brief overview of the idea here, there's this base fab object, and it's associated with useful information like how big the machine is. And we can do things like move retract to a point on the machine. So that's moving to a XYZ point in the machine without extruding any material or not letting things kind of ooze out in places we don't want it to. So we could get to the center of the machine by accessing like the max X and max Y properties. And then we can extrude some material by using the move extrude command. We can specify some more details about how to do that. And then we can quickly use this kind of simple set of commands to build up more complicated objects. So you can kind of have some fun printing, weird or different things that you can't with conventional software like this. And you can do it in a very kind of computationally modest way. And one thing I think is kind of interesting about this is that there are some creative opportunities that emerge from kind of the gap between the design that you've planned and the physical realities of what kind of comes out of the machine. And there's some kind of interesting kind of material behavior and different material patterns that you can find in this gap. As a brief kind of historical interlude, as I'm like kind of talking about rethinking our approaches to using machines to draw lines, I'm kind of reminded just of the history of using machines to draw anything. And so this image is from 1971. It shows computer scientist Esther Rose Wolfson on the left and an artist, Manfred Moore, on the right. And they're leaning over this fancy new pen plotter that was at the Center for Meteorological Research in France. And it was kind of like totally unprecedented at the time for artists to be able to be using these machines creatively. And, a lot has changed between the 70s and now, but, there's a lot of things that haven't. And for Moore and Wolfson, their drawing data was being written to a magnetic tape that they then took over to their plotter to execute their design. And if we're 3D printing something today in the usual way, we're still sort of asynchronously designing some model. Maybe you put the code on an SD card, you walk over to your printer, and then you print it. And so maybe our turnaround time is something like minutes or hours instead of days or months, but the underlying workflow is kind of the same. And so to think about tightening up these feedback loops even more then, one kind of interface metaphor I think is useful is in music. Because if you play a note that sounds off, you kind of get that feedback immediately. But if there's some print setting that is going to cause problems down the line, you might not kind of find that out for hours, and maybe you've wasted a bunch of kind of precious material that you wanted to use. So here I just have a MIDI controller set up next to my 3D printer. And the idea is that we can tie different buttons and knobs on the MIDI controller to modify commands as the printer is running. And so with this sort of setup, we can try 3D printing another line. And this time I'm tweaking some knobs in the bottom left on the MIDI controller there. And one knob is kind of dropping the kind of bed of this machine down a little bit so that the material is kind of dropping down from a height. Another one is editing the speed. And then if we look from the point of view of a camera that's attached to the nozzle of the machine, you can see, we're kind of printing the simplest geometry possible, which is just moving in a straight line, but we can find more interesting behavior with the kind of right choice of settings. So at the end of this print here, the material starts being laid down in those really nice repeatable coil structures. And so we can use that MIDI interface to kind of find all sorts of different coiling patterns. So here I'm just quickly messing around with different settings, and the graph at the bottom is just a recording of the settings as they're being changed over the course of the print up at the top. So by kind of depositing material from a little bit of a height, I can get these kind of small sinusoidal patterns that are shown in the top in orange there. And then if I tweak things some more, I get these coils that sort of reliably alternate side to side in the middle in green. And then if you change things a lot, then you can get these big loops shown at the bottom. And one thing about, I think, these patterns is that it's kind of like I'm no longer designing them up front, but they're found through tweaking different parameters. And so the work of kind of notating a pattern has given way to just trying to document the patterns that we're able to find. And then we can use those kind of coils or those patterns that we find to kind of integrate them into different objects. So here I have 2 cubes printed on the right side with 2 different coils that I found. So one is kind of a tighter, more dense object, and one is a looser coil. And you're able to kind of get kind of stiffer, more compliant objects by kind of making use of these coils. And one thing about this is that it's kind of not totally clear now how I would share this design with someone else, because those coils are really sensitive to all those settings that I was showing. And that's going to in turn depend on, what material you're using, what sort of state your machine is in, if you've calibrated things recently. And so this kind of fundamentally shifts the focus from the shape that we're printing to the settings that we're using to print it. And so to be able to try and share these patterns, one approach that I've tried is to synchronize a video of the machine with the instruction that's being executed, the JavaScript code that generated that machine instruction, and then any MIDI adjustments that I've been making. So the idea is to have kind of a transcription of the print job that I could share with someone else to show them what I did. So that's shown in this interface where as the video of the machine plays, there's some machine instructions that are kind of scrolling in lockstep on the left. And if I scrub forward or backward in any one view, then kind of the other ones update accordingly. And so my hope is that this sort of documentation can make it easier to kind of start experimenting with new materials and new processes in 3D printing. Just as kind of another example of this, this is a gel, which is a liquid when it's cold. But you can 3D print it at room temperature. So in the top left video, you can see that this sort of kind of oozes out of this syringe that I have when it's too cool to print. And just doing simple things like printing a line can be really finicky at first. And so with this sort of MIDI interface and the transcription logs that I've been showing, my goal is that all of this kind of tedious knowledge that you need to sort of explore different and new material possibilities in 3D printing can be easier to share with other people and get started. I'll end there for now, because I'm very interested in any sort of, comments or questions that this crowd may have.
Super, thanks very much, Blair. So yeah, please do type your question. Thanks, Berlin. So yeah, please do share your questions in the chat. And I think this is a super interesting area, having kind of more direct interaction with material through these kinds of machines. But I've noticed a couple of other people exploring this as well, like Mass Goodsward in Technical University in Eindhoven and Evan Raskob in London. I'm just wondering if there's like a community forming around this kind of practice yet, this kind of live interaction with 3D printers.
Yeah, I think it's like burgeoning, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's a bona fide community yet. Yeah. Yeah, I think that it seems that everybody is kind of maybe arrived at their own kind of ad hoc approaches to doing things, which is, I think, very cool. Yeah, I think that more community sharing would be cool.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's so many possibilities, I think. So exciting area. Yeah, Dave Griffiths says the video and instruction interface would work really well with other crafts too, which are really hard to describe. I'm not sure what crafts Dave has in mind. Does that speak to you, the idea that this could apply outside of 3D printing?
Yeah, I can certainly think about it with like other machines as well, like thinking about exploring like surface textures of like milling wood. I think Dave is saying weaving as well. Yeah, I think there's a lot of a lot of like maybe textile things that whenever I see the difference between the notated pattern and what comes out of the machine, I'm always like, oh, how on earth did that happen? I'm like, like forever kind of dazzled by that. So I would love to talk to someone who's kind of more invested in that practice to learn how this would be useful.
Nice. So yeah, unless there's any questions from Berlin.
Yes.
We do.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. One question first. The thing that got to my mind when I saw the little squares you created, it popped like replicable chaos, and then that goes against the idea of chaos somehow. But it was really cool to see the results. And then my question for you is, was your intention to replicate the machine, the 3D printer machine commands into a different mean via the MIDI tool, or were there deeper intentions, like potentially the creator gains control on those small elements and things change because now you have control?
Yeah, so part of it, there's kind of like a lot of experiments and sort of like interactive fabrication, trying to make like interactions with machines more like maybe craft interactions where you have kind of more hands-on control of things. So that was really part of the motivation, was like instead of having to go back, it's really comes out of frustration. Instead of having to go back to my computer and like redesign a model to change kind of change my speed by 1 millimeter per second. Like, okay, well, I would love to just turn this nice little knob and make it go a little faster. So it's definitely trying to give more control over the actual process. And I also think that using a physical MIDI controller as opposed to a digital interface is just really nice, because you're just kind of sitting there and you're turning a knob and you're right next to it and looking at the material, as opposed to looking at a screen and sort of forgetting about what's happening in the real world. So those were a couple of my motivations. Yeah, thank you.
So we have a question from the Pattern Club Sheffield studio.
Oh, great.
Can you hear me okay? Or
Yes.
Okay. You had mentioned printing with a gel that turns into a liquid when you cool it, which
Yes.
was really interesting because you don't expect things to turn to liquid when you cool them.
Yeah.
What's the most interesting thing you've done with it or are planning to do with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the reason that I was printing this is because I think that kind of alongside, exploring like kind of material practices, I think another group of people that are using these are like scientists. So scientists also often like print these gels and can't do anything with them because they're hard to print. But one thing is cool about it is that if you print something and then cool it off, then it'll just kind of melt away. So one thing I think would be fun is if you were printing like, especially like a heavier material, like you could imagine like, I don't know, some sort of like Play-Doh thing that would, and use this as a support for it. So you can sort of print up a gel, use this as a support for it. And then if you just pop it in the freezer after, then the supports will melt away and you're left with whatever object you had. And it's kind of like an un-3D printable form, usually, because it would have just collapsed on itself. But yeah, I think there's other fun stuff you could probably play on with that.
Cool stuff.
Thank you.
So unless there's other questions anywhere around the world, I think we'll thank Blair again.
Thank you all.